All right, good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Getting darker and darker now. So, not much to see. Not that there's much to see when it's light either. Going over the Delaware River right now. Want to talk a little bit about something. I'm trying to think. There's so many things on my mind to talk about. What are we going to talk about today? Kind of would like to speak about spirituality and the different modes of spirituality, kind of my theory on what spirituality is. So let's talk about this. I work full-time as a chaplain. I'm part-time as a chaplain in two different institutions. So one of the institutions, my part-time institution, had a role for me of facilitating spirituality groups. And about a year after I started doing this, they gave me a little guide on how to lead a spirituality group in a secular setting. It's interesting because I was just now listening to a training from Brandeis University on chaplaincy in a secular setting. Maybe I should teach something along these lines. Maybe I should reach out to them, actually. But my take on what a spirituality group is, and what spirituality is in the greater sense, perhaps we could call the lowest common denominator of spirituality. Because when we hear this word spirituality, we immediately think about religion. Sometimes within the context of religion, we think about a certain type or typology of religion, a certain archetype of religion, perhaps. We think of spirituality perhaps along the lines of meditative and contemplative approach to religion. In Judaism, sometimes you hear discussion about Jewish spirituality. And you have this picture of Kumsitz, which is where you're going to sit around in a circle, and maybe someone has a guitar, and they sing some meditative songs, and someone shares some inspirational stories, usually, and we feel very spiritual, right? And is that really what spirituality means? In a similar sense, I remember, somebody from a conservative synagogue, a young man, talking about how he wishes there was more ruach. And that's the buzzword that, especially in the conservative movement and in the camping movement, they talk of the ruach, the spirit. But it means more than just spirit, this feeling that you're in this meditative state and you connect it with your religious devotions. And so the use of particular songs in liturgy, particular tunes, and that liturgical approach that's perhaps somewhat in the neo-Hasidic realm. Something along the line of the renewal movement and things like that, or even within traditional Hasidism, depending on the community, or in the Orthodox Neo-Hasidic world, something, a Carlebach minion, things like that. As much as I try to stay away from mentioning Shlomo Carlebach for various reasons, especially now with the Me Too movement and things, the victims that he had. I don't mean to say Lashon Hara, but that's, and I'm sure in other traditions, that's how we think of spirituality, in the sense of, Eastern spirituality, meditation, in Buddhism, or going to an ashram and, being involved in these things, or, perhaps we associate with mysticism, whether it's in Eastern Orthodox Christianity or in Pentecostal Christianity, or perhaps in Sufi Islam, to the point where we'll say that these others are not spiritual. I mean, the Hasidim and maybe the Musar, the Balei Musar, among the Jews, are the spiritual ones, and the others are more about decorum or scholarship and so forth. The truth of the matter is, at least the way that New York State was going to define it for me, that is not how we define spirituality at all. We try to find what we could call the lowest common denominator. We come up saying that spirituality is very simply whatever makes your life meaningful. Spirituality doesn't have to be positive. There can be positive spirituality, negative spirituality, neutral spirituality. But when I heard that, what makes our life meaningful, I came to the conclusion that it means something quite specific. The way I understand it is that it means what separates a human being from an animal. I've heard it said, I don't remember who said it, that instead of having the binomial nomenclature of humanity as we know it under Homo sapiens, the human being of intelligence, of wisdom, it should rather be Homo spiritualis, the spiritual being. Although, as we'll see, the Neanderthal had some form of spirituality, as we will define it, and that's something that's well recognized by archaeologists. So essentially, spirituality is what separates us from the animals. At least human spirituality is. So we can start off with religion. Religion is obviously spiritual, all forms of religion. Doesn't matter that it's a cold spirituality. It's still spirituality. The German Jews in Washington Heights are very spiritual people. They don't approach their spirituality the same way the Hasidim do. But spirituality is what they're all about. The German Orthodox and Jews in Washington Heights. There's different expressions of spirituality, but it's nonetheless spiritual. All religion is spiritual. At least the way that we're defining it here. Even, meaning because it's what makes our lives meaningful and makes our lives different than the animal. And so ceremony, religion, meditation, these are the obvious spiritual things. I kind of say there are 3 or 4 tiers of spirituality. I'm still developing this theory. So the first tier are the obviously spiritual things of religion, philosophy. Some of them might be in the first and second category. Religion, philosophy, meditation, and ritual. The next level will be things that religions tend to use, but a lot of secular people appreciate them, which philosophy and meditation can fall into that as well, as can ritual. And in a certain sense, if you have all that, then you have religion also. Essentially, what we have here is music, art, literature, drama, which are forms of art. Music is a form of art. Literature is a form of art. The arts, the liberal arts, perhaps one to say, but the arts. You know, the differences between arts and sciences, both arts and sciences are spiritual. So art is spiritual. It's used in religion, but it's also appreciated outside the realm of religion. Many religions have sacred art. Most religions have sacred music. Some religions have, and almost all religions have sacred literature, whether they are a written tradition or an oral tradition. I don't think any religion can exist without sacred literature in some form. And drama is often used as a form of ministry. It originated, as far as we know, as a religious devotion among the ancient Greeks. And noting that when we speak of art, so the primitive cave people drew pictures on their cave walls, which were generally understood to be religious expressions and devotions. And so in one of my groups that we had on spirituality, one of the residents of the institution laughed and said, "Rock and roll is my religion." And I said, "That's not funny, that's true. It is your religion." For a lot of people, you know, these things fulfill the same needs in a person's soul, or try to fulfill those needs as religion. You know, and so many of these things have such similar trappings to what we're used to in organized religion. You go to the movies, you go to the play, and you're sitting in pews, somewhat similar to sitting in church. To the point where, some of my rabbis said that, going into a movie theater is forbidden because it's, and I'm not that pious. I went to the movies yesterday, to be honest. But that it is a form of idolatry and worship. In a certain sense, he said it's better to watch a movie on a TV screen than in a movie theater for that reason. Whereas I've heard others say, no, it's better to go out to the movie theater and not bring it into your home. And me, I do both. I bring it in my home. I go to the theater. I'm not so pious, I'm sorry. But I try to at least compartmentalize and try not to get carried away too much. I get carried away a little bit. I mean, I remember Rabbi Bart Zadok talking about attending a convention where he was one of the celebrities, and he said the people there were going on a pilgrimage, and we have that spirituality of going on a pilgrimage. The next level, which I believe is also spiritual, are the things that I would say the third tier of spirituality are the things that we think are utilitarian in society. We don't think generally of them as spiritual. But again, it's what separates us from the animals. Politics, history, science, math. These things give meaning to our lives. I don't talk of history. I don't think a Dalmatian dog looks back at the first Dalmatian dog who received the AKC, credentials the way we look at George Washington or Abe Lincoln. History is a spiritual experience. Visiting a museum is again somewhat like visiting a shrine, making a pilgrimage, perhaps even like going to church, going to, see the relics of George Washington in a museum in Newburgh, New York. Somewhat a spiritual experience. At least I would describe it as such. Politics, and the thing is, religions use all these things. So religions all have histories, and people find a certain religious devotion in discussing and studying the history of their church or of their movement or of their faith. And so too, studying the history of secular things gives people meaning and fulfillment in life in a similar way, in a secular, spiritual way. Politics, again, many people, their religions, their politics are inspired by their religious views, both on the right and on the left. Sometimes, someone like Mayor Buttigieg, he sounds more preachy than anybody I've heard of on the right. And he invokes religion very much. And even without that, obviously we know, the moral majority on the right and so forth. So both on the right and the left, there's a spirituality, and even without being religious, there is this feeling of a duty, almost like a religious duty, when going to vote. And interestingly, we talk about casting a vote. So in Christianity, certainly the fisherman is an archetype. casting his line. And in some of the pagan traditions, they speak of casting a spell and the connection with that of casting a vote. Science, religious people are interested in the crossroads of science and religion. Again, both on the left and the right, and they have their own approaches to that. And people who are not religious, still, they find science fulfills some of those aspects that religion fulfills for them. Mathematics, many religions have sacred mathematics. Judaism certainly does. The Gematria, the 5% movement, a rather obscure cult that began in the 1960s, have their sacred geometry. And many other religions have this. And already going back to Pythagoras and so forth, the Pythagoreans were really a religious cult, and yet they brought so many aspects of modern day mathematics to the world. So all of these things are spiritual. Again, you can be secular and appreciate the spirituality of these things, and for many people who are not religious, these are the things that give them meaning in life and enjoyment in life. And then the next level, the fourth level, we can speak of is the things that we share with the animals, and yet, as I said, ceremony is spiritual. And so when we eat and drink and have sex and go to the bathroom and sleep and wake up, we don't do them in the way an animal does it. We wear clothing, and when we are doing something that we're wearing less clothing, we try to do it in private as much as possible. And the people who perhaps don't want to wear clothing understand there's a certain taboo in what they're doing. We don't just, we ceremonialize everything. People who are totally secular usually want to have we're born and we die and we go through puberty and all these things, and we have ceremonies connected to all these life cycles. People who are totally secular still generally want to have a nice wedding, even if they're atheists. They want to have a meaningful ceremony. The same thing, a funeral. And the fact that we just don't leave bodies to rot in the street. And even in those cultures that do ceremonialize that as well. And so the fact that the Neanderthals buried their dead is what the archaeologists point to say that they were religious people. And all of these ceremonies that we have around birth and passage to adulthood and the way we eat, and that we have etiquette. Emily Post, again, doesn't necessarily have to be religious. Religious people say grace and have religious ceremonies, but secular people also have their ceremonies. The fact that we have separate bathrooms for men and women. The fact that bathrooms are such private places. Excuse me. All these things, of course, they're informed by religious traditions that people have, less religious people still have in their past, as part of their culture. But all these things are what separates us from the animals. I'll finish with a story that's related to this. Rabbi David Gottlieb in Jerusalem told us the story that he would teach in the boys' seminary and the girls' seminary. And in the girls' seminary, there was one girl, she's a Jewish girl. She said she's an atheist, and she said, I cannot consciously be giving lip service to something I don't believe in, and she refused to recite blessings before she ate. And all the rabbis and the teachers in the seminary said, no, you have to just give lip service. And Rabbi Gottlieb said, no, don't give lip service to something you don't believe. And they all yelled at him, what are you saying? This is not how we do kiruv. So Rabbi Gottlieb is a Boston Chassid. He went to his Rebbe, Boston Rebbe, and asked him, was he wrong in saying this? And Boston Rebbe said, no, Reb David, you're correct. The one thing I would add is that before she eats, she should just have a pause. And the thing is that we can think and be mindful at that pause of all the things secularly that brought us to the. But even if you don't think, just it's a pause that humanizes. You're not an animal. We do things in the way a human being acts. And as much as it hurts us that someone's an atheist and so forth, but we have to be pragmatic and live in the world we live in, but still try to give people guidance. And maybe this will open up our heart to religion that we're accepting. I don't know. I'll tell you another story about that mindfulness. A very famous story. It was brought in the Sfar B'Kedeshim. There was a man, he sat down at a bar and took a shot of whiskey. A Jewish man. There was a rabbi there, I guess he was the innkeeper maybe. And he said, in German, you have to say a bracha. What did you do? He said, you think about this. How many stalks of wheat there are in the field that just go fallow and are never harvested? And how many are harvested and fall off the wagon? And how many wind up as animal food? And how many are worthy to be people food? And how many grains are worthy to go through all the steps from being harvested and processed and carried and transported, and all the people who are involved in doing that, and all the steps are involved in doing that, and all of this was leading up to this one moment when this grain of wheat became this cup of whiskey that was predestined for you, a Jew, to recite a blessing over it. And who knows if perhaps your father's soul was reincarnated into that grain of wheat and was waiting for you to make a bracha. And then at that moment, the guy remembered it was his father's yahrzeit. Oh, I dropped my keys. So that's the story. There's the key. Spirituality comes in many forms, but really, and there's negative spirituality as well, positive spirituality. But really, when people make a statement, I'm religious, but I'm spiritual, but not religious, they're not saying anything, because every human being is spiritual. Even one who, you could say, I believe in the supernatural, but not in a sense of an organized religion. That's something. That's already separating yourself. But even the biggest atheist, unless you're a vegetable, in a coma, then you're spiritual. Now, then the question is, what about, don't animals experience spirituality? The only thing I know is that it's a social construct that we make about the animals, how we anthropomorphize them. And so too, the truth is, no human being's ever a vegetable. Every human being's life has meaning, and the animals' lives have meaning vis-a-vis their interactions with humans, and the human lives have meaning vis-a-vis their interactions with other humans. And so fellowship is very important as well. But, Viktor Frankl, he spoke about man's search for meaning, and he spoke about how the Nazis sought to dehumanize the Jews and the other people in the concentration camps and turn them into animals, and our job has to be, wherever we are, is to help people be rehumanized, help people embrace their own spirituality, whatever it is. At least that's the first step. If we want to proselytize and bring other people to our own particular flavor, that's your own business. Certainly if someone wants to, I'll try to facilitate them if they're able to. If they're not, they won't. But that's the story. All right. Well, thank you for listening. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later.